All right. Hi, this is Dr. Chetan Fadke, and we'll continue where we left off. We're talking about fat. We established so far that too much fat in our belly, in the viscera, is not good. Although in some cultures it's considered good. Actually, many cultures it's considered a sign of prosperity, and that's what it is. The more prosperous you are, the more access you have to rich foods. And when you have access to rich foods, and by rich I mean calorie rich, and that's when you get fat. So there's a reason why people drew that connection. Anyway, back to our subject. We established that too much fat inside our belly is not good. It has problems. It's not just about the fat, the visual appearance of fat. It's also about the it's biologically active, so it's creating problems in our body. It's creating chemicals that can disrupt a lot of different systems and cause diseases. All right. Where does the fat come from? All right. So fats can be classified into two categories. One are called non-essential and essential. And the name, the word itself tells you that essential meaning we don't have those fat in our body and we need it from an outside source. And non-essential meaning our body can produce that fat and it's sufficient. It doesn't need an outside source for that type of fat. So anyway, there are two sources. One that our body makes on its own, it's called non-essential, and essential is we take in our diet. All right, having said that, how much uh, how much fat do we really need? That's a question that most of us have to answer. But before we get there, let's go back to dietary intake of fat. So when fat comes in the food, what happens? Well, first thing that happens is that our body senses that there's fat in the food, because that's important, because then it creates certain situations. For example, gallbladder releases bile into the intestines to help process that fat, so it can be broken down and then taken up, absorbed. So once we eat fat, that fat gets into our blood, and guess what? Insulin, yes, you heard it right. Insulin, which is typically in our heads associated with sugar. It's related to sugar. In fact, some diseases are called diseases of insulin. I mean, some cultures call diabetes insulin problem. Anyway, so insulin has 100 different activities, 100 different functions. One that we are all quite familiar with is insulin, because it's a role with sugar. And the second role actually I want to talk to you about is related to fat. So what insulin does is takes the fat that's come into the blood and packs it into things called as cells called as adipose cells. So these are basically fat cells that store fat. By the way, a little bit of trivia: the number of fat cells in our body remains the same. Once we become adults, the number of fat cells remains the same. But here's the problem: the number of fat cells remains the same, but the amount of fat that's packed into it swells. So you can think of it as you have a bank account. So you only have one bank account, maybe two, checking, savings. But the amount of money that you invest in it and the savings grows. If you're not a big spender, if you're a saver, it grows. All right, so we know that when we absorb fat from our food, it then gets transported into fat cells. All right, so that begs a question. If fat goes into fat cells, what purpose does fat serve? Because fat has calories, right? A lot of calories. And we'll talk about that in a second. But before, let's talk about the role of fat in our body. The role of fat is to store energy for future. Like I said, bank earlier, that's what it is. We eat fat and our bodies tell us you should have more, you should have more, you should have more. There's very little stopping of our desire to eat fat, and and there's a reason for that, because evolutionarily speaking, human beings grew in the past. Food was very scarce, So our brains, the way they developed, we take up fat and we store it for future. Then yeah,